Welcome to Reimagine the Contact Center. I'm your host, Marc Bernstein, and my guest today is Diane Magers, founder and chief experience officer at Experience Catalysts. Hey, Diane.
Oh, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Excellent, thank you.
Good. Good to see you.
You
Oh
too.
yeah, doing just great.
You want me to put on a filter or anything on my phone?
No,
Okay.
please.
Oh,
Your background's
no.
fantastic.
Thank you. I remodeled my office while I was home.
Uh,
It used to be this horrible, horrible yellow color, and blue is my signature color. So I'm like, I'm just going to put a new one.
Uh, Diane, me too on both fronts. This is all since the pandemic. Set up the bookshelf, got the painting, put the piano out here. This used to be almost like a second living room that we never used, and I was like, let's turn this into something we really love. Um,
Nice.
and
Nice.
I would love to put blue everywhere I can afford to put blue.
Yeah, it was not. It was hard to get the right shade of blue too. You can see on this side,
Hmm.
it's only the accent wall. This is a round. Rest of it is a round room, so it's hard to have a corner. But this accent wall, we decided, and then we have kind of a prairie sage. I don't know what you call it. I want that job, by the way. I want to be able to name paints and nail polish in my next career.
I used to love the color periwinkle just because it was named periwinkle.
Right. It just says so much, and I even like the prairie sage. Like that's the color we chose, but that tells you in your mind. It tells you what that color really is because you have an idea of what it looks like.
Yeah, I imagine
Yeah.
there's so much thought that goes into that too, where there has to be like it's either one person who names 1,000 colors a day, or it has to be like a writer's room where they put up the
Right.
color and it's like I think it has to be like a writer's room with by consensus because otherwise, one person names the color and you're like, that's not it. But I guess there's also a limit to how much time you can spend doing that.
Yeah, and I think about the color, the paint colors are different than nail polish. So nail polish, because it has a bigger spectrum and there's sparkles and there's all these things, that would be, I think, more fun because you've got a wider range of, bubble gum. Nobody's going to paint their walls bubble gum. Well, very
Hmm.
few maybe, but yeah, you've got more options.
My fiance loves doing her nails, absolutely loves it, and she gets these. They're like paste on nails,
Yeah.
but it's real nail polish from this company called Color Street, and and they all have funny names. So one of the and they'll all be in their nail group together, like on Facebook. And one of the exercises they'll do is get your husband's, fiance's, significant others to guess the name. So we all come up with these crazy names like Midnight in Paris.
That's right, right.
Yeah.
See, exactly. People love to be creative, and it's such an easy way to do it. So that's what I want. There's two things I want to do. I want to do that, or I want to be chief customer officer for like Patagonia or the American Cancer Society, some nonprofit that has a huge purpose that I'm passionate about. So eventually, we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see how that turns out.
What an awesome goal, and what a clear goal.
Yeah, I'm really excited for it. I haven't made it come to life yet. And the other part of me though is like, do I really want to go back to a brand? I've been on my own for so long that, don't really go. But if it serves that purpose, I'd also do that. Probably talking about the psychology piece. So my specialty was in death and dying. I know that seems really strange for a 23-year-old college kid, but so the hospice organization, I did training for them for their volunteers when I was in college, and I would love to close that circle, literally, and go back and work for them again.
Yeah, that is so admirable. I'll talk about my fiance again. I can't get enough of her. She's a music therapist at Children's Hospital, right down the street from us, and works with kids who have like long-term debilitating illnesses and cancer and terrible diagnoses.
Yeah.
And just the perspective that she has gotten in, first of all, what happens when you can heal a kid? Like, what does that mean when there's a life that is continuing that previously might not have? And then the reverse of when you see like someone's timeline collapsed like that, it gives you a really, really unique perspective. So anyway, we would love to hear like a little bit about like your time in hospice psychology and some of the things you learned there.
And I came about it organically. So I went away to college, and I was there for just a few months. And my father got sick with lung cancer. He was a fireman, a smoker. He refinished furniture, and a painter. So he didn't give his lungs a chance. And this is way back. So I came back to a college that was close to home, and I just became fascinated with the process that we went through, knowing he was terminal. And I watched other hospice, and I saw other patients go through it. And this sense that nobody on their deathbed ever talks about the fact that they wish they'd worked more. They don't talk about the possessions they owned. They talked about how people made them feel and how they wanted to spend more time, and really that human connection. And so that was what attracted me to that, was helping families kind of with the unfinished business of saying those things they hadn't said. So that's how I came into that profession. But it truly launched, I think, for me, not only my own interpersonal relationships with people, where I help them, I try to create those memories, I try to really talk about the deep things that matter to us rather than high level how's the weather, because I think that's really what makes life rich. And so that's been part of my education, to your point earlier about how do you carry that forward to becoming a customer experience professional? Like, where does that fit? And
Yeah.
that's part of it, is making sure people see it's not a business, it's humans, and how you need to make sure that emotion that they're carrying is part of your brand.
Mm.
Yeah.
One of the interesting things about that, Diane, is I heard you talk about deep relationships and focusing on that. But what's interesting is you obviously need two parties to do that. It's hard to have a one-way deep conversation.
Sure.
So how does one pull that out of others? Should you try to pull it out of others? And is there, how do you gauge the balance between respecting what someone wants to share and what doesn't want to share? And I promise we'll take this to CX shortly, but I think you can see the relationship there.
Absolutely. I think we can take it directly to customer experience in some ways, but I think your question is, we think about, I remember telling my daughter this, she was all nervous about going to the dance because she was scared of what people would think of her. And I said, you know what, you should just think about the fact that everybody else is thinking the same thing. So nobody's thinking about you, they're thinking about themselves. And part of what we love to do for ourselves, we just talked about introspection in this stage of COVID, was people want to be able to explore themselves through others, like seeing themselves through others' eyes. So starting conversations around, I saw you were going to the specific concert. Like, where did you get attached to that music? Or why do you have a piano in your room? Like, people love to be able to talk about and share because it helps them explore. And that creates these emotional bonds with people that are, as I said, way beyond the how was the weather today. Sure, you're going to have high level conversations with acquaintances. But those friends, I think you can think about, and the audience can think about, the friends that you have are the ones that if you don't see them for 3 months, you can walk in the room and go into a deep conversation, no problem. And you can talk about things that you couldn't talk about with anybody else. So that is what creates, to me, those relationships of shared values, shared information, shared feelings, emotions, all those pieces, and helping others to recognize that and what you can do to help reflect back to them if they're in a struggle of what do I do, or giving them feedback that it's hard for anybody else to give them, that because you're close, you can do that and help them improve. So now just to customer experience, that's the same thing we think about. One of the things that we think about with customer experience is we talk about getting the voice of customer all the time. Well, I kind of stopped saying that because I started talking about a conversation strategy.
Mm.
Many times we're getting information from customers on surveys or looking at social media, but we need to start thinking more about the community and how we're not only asking about what we want to know, but being open with what do you want to tell us? And if they give us a response, we need to be responding back and really engaging that customer in a way that makes sense. I don't know how many surveys you filled out. I've filled out a lot, and I've had 2 companies come back to me with responses to my issues or my feedback. That's not that's a one-way street. And you know how long a marriage would last with a one-way street, right? Not at all.
I've gotten a sense. Um, Diane, so you made me think about a survey that I filled out, where I actually filled out the survey, I didn't get a response, and then I wrote a note to the CEO. And the company was a big company, but not so big that there's no way a CEO would ever get back to the customer, which I don't even think we should go there because then you should always get back to the customer. But I wrote a note to the CEO, and he said, "Hey, let me sync you up with our director of sales to talk about keeping your agreement." And it was like, that is not what I was going for.
You see the approach there, the psychology of that, of it's about their goals. It's about them, not you. And I remember the very first CEO who actually got me into this space. When he walked in a room, it was not about him walking in the room. It was about him coming up to you and asking you about your day and where you were. It was so much not about his ego or anything else. And he was well respected, did phenomenal work, and he's the one who said the same thing about customers. We're not going to do anything. We're not going to do anything. We're going to respond to what the customers need us to do to be successful in their business, and that cascades back to our business. And I remember that to this day about him talking about that. But he said, it's not when you walk in a room, it's not about you. It's about the person that you're going to go have a conversation with.
Yeah.
I've always remembered that.
That's it's one of the things that Dale Carnegie says. His book How to Win Friends and Influence People. I recommend it all the time. And you hear the title and you go, "Ugh, win friends, influence people? Is this like a Machiavelli 2.0?"
Yeah.
And then I usually clarify, like, no. The book was written in the 1930s, and that's just like the linguistic style at the time. What he's trying to say is how to like build a network of relationships of people that trust you and that you trust and that's meaningful, and be able to communicate your ideas in a way that people can receive it. And that concept of you focus. The company Balto, we have 10 principles of communication, and the first one is you focused. I think it makes such a big difference in the receptiveness of the other person you're communicating with.
It does. And I love that you have that trust factor brought in, because that to me is one of the pieces of experience that we talk about, but I don't think we talk about it enough. I've seen it rise up in the last year because of how companies responded to the pandemic, either eroded or increased the trust that customers had with them. The trust really comes down to, I go to Starbucks a lot. I hate to admit it, but I do. I pay $5 for a cup of coffee every time I go. What am I doing? But the reason that I go there, and the reason that they can have an issue and get my drink wrong, is that I trust them enough because they've established a relationship with me where it's been a fair exchange of value. They get my right. They use my name. They always ask me how I'm doing. That establishes trust for me. So I'm more willing to overlook an issue, kind of like a bank account, if I've established that trust with them. So that's where brands, I think, are kind of failing to really ensure that conversation keeps going, and that even if they're a brand that's not visible in your head, the mind share, that they know the minute that your brand comes to their mind, that there's definitely a trust and feeling of that I have a relationship with that brand. And I don't think we spend enough time really thinking about that when they're not interacting with us.
I agree.
Think about the touch points and the journey and all that, but we're all living our lives and we touch hundreds of brands every day. So who's going to make the difference, and who am I going to feel connected to?
Diane, one of the things when I was reading through your bio beforehand is you were talking about helping companies make the most of the opportunities in their customer interactions. What sort of opportunities do you see that maybe didn't exist 5 years ago, and what sort of opportunities you see that you almost want to shake people and say, "Hey, this is a real opportunity in interactions. You should be focusing here."
I'll give you a really example that's happening right now. So I'm working with this wonderful progressive nonprofit. It's a 100-person company, and they do certifications for professionals. And one of the things that they've come to realize is that while they're a certification company, they're actually a community company. And what that means is that these professionals have very few support systems in place that really help them grow as a professional or help them connect to other professionals. So a certification is something everybody has in common, or most people have in common when they're in that profession. And the ability for them to look at how can we provide keeping their skills up to date? How can we provide, hey, I ran into a situation and I needed to do something, or I'm looking for my next career. The ability for them to see that and see the opportunity and build their brand toward that was just a gap. There was a need that wasn't filled. And so they'd come to realize that that is more of their trajectory than just doing the certifications. Like they could run their business all day long doing that, but they're ripe for disruption because they haven't created a community. They've got lots of things going on that are detracting them from engaging those customers. So that's a prime example of when you just need to be looking for the opportunities beyond what you think you're doing and what value you're really providing to the customer.
I love that. And, we think a lot and talk a lot about, mobilizing your brand advocates and, mobilizing your brand champions. And we talk about it on an individual level. Like there's a person you want to go mobilize. But I don't think we talk a lot about how you can mobilize a community with the emphasis on the interactions that those people have with each other. What sort of opportunities do you see there?
Oh, well, I can give you an example of when I was with the CXPA. One of the things that we did in our events is we had open door time, which meant if you had an expert in a certain field, you could schedule time to meet with them. So this ability to actually connect people with each other is part of the recognition that that's part of our brand, is that, hey, we're kind of like the 900 number for CX, right? You call us if you're looking for a role, if you're looking for an expert in a certain place, we can help guide you there. So it's not really a service that we offer, but what we're really doing is connecting those people to a need that they have and giving them the right person to go talk to with a specific target of making sure they get the value they're looking for.
Has that gotten more complicated or harder to do?
I I would say there's two things to that. Easier from a technology standpoint of we have the data, we have all those things that we can make happen. But I think if you lose sight of that human connection and you have that conversation around, you can tell me in a questionnaire what kind of expert you're looking for, but I can tell you in a 15-minute conversation, I can dig in and say, you probably really don't want that, but you may want to talk to this person because they have a bit broader view of the problem you're having. And I think they'd be great for you. You can't get that from filling out a survey or a questionnaire. So I think technology has enabled that where we're able to track and manage and gather the information, but we certainly can't replace that. Hey, I've got somebody I think you should meet.
Mm-hmm. And that kind of makes me think of, the concept of that there's been a historical focus on trying to extract information from your customer through surveys, through NPS, through voice of the customer, through speech analytics, and that's absolutely valuable. But there hasn't been a lot of focus of pushing something back to the customer or sending the customer off into the world with something that they didn't have before. And I think that when we think about the contact center as a profit center, and that trend that very much appears to be emerging right now, it can't just be that one-way exchange. You need to kind of send them back with something. Does that make sense at all?
Yes, and you will find a lot of information around the value creation story now. There's actually a value creation journal, and that's this community that we've created around that. Its whole concept is the fact that your purpose is to create value for that customer. What's on their scorecard? What are their unmet needs? How do you know you're helping them to do that? So absolutely, especially in a care center, because people are coming to you. This is a passion of mine, as you can tell. People are coming to you in an already altered state. What I mean by that is they typically having a problem, they're anxious about something, they've got a concern, they're deeply impacted. Think about a life insurance policy you have to call and get activated, right? They're coming to you already in an emotional state. And so if we don't deal with that and also not only resolve their issue, but care for that experience and then give them other things to go do that will help create more value. Example of that is a life insurance company when there was a death in the family, and somebody was coming back and calling about the life insurance policy. They had a publication and they would send out via email, text, whatever, that talked about the things to consider when a loved one dies, things you probably wouldn't think about, like bank accounts and a trust, or hey, you're going to have to change, or here's who to call for whatever. That's value to me. That's creating value. Yes, I can functionally get that done, but what's the and behind it? So I love the word and, because it's, yes, I solved your problem and I was able to do this for you. So that's the and you're talking about.
Yeah, there's a tricky balance there. You know, of course, the historical focus has been handle time, hold time, first call resolution, and there's, you know, the contact center will need to continue to pay a lot of attention to costs and, you know, managing costs. But at the same time, it seems like now folks are saying, oh, but if you want to make the call 30 seconds longer in order to provide value, that's okay. So, you know, what sort of, how should expectations change for how the agent is supposed to interact with the customer, and then, you know, similarly, how should we change how agents are evaluated in order to match those expectations?
So I'm going to give you an example of that. That may not be exactly what you're asking, but I think it will stimulate the audience's thinking. So I'm going to give you an example of NPS, because NPS is used sometimes in contact center, but for a lot of companies. And I'm not knocking it because it gets a good barometer, but the question needs to be different. The question about Net Promoter is, we're asking the customer how likely are they to recommend us. And the real question that you want to be asking is, well, do they actually recommend us? And why do they recommend us? Because if you look at those customers who come to you through referrals, they are lower cost of acquisition. They're more likely to recommend others too. They stay longer. They're less price sensitive. So by creating that relationship with them and the ability to have an advocate and have a conversation and really create that deep engagement is going to drive that behavior, which then turns into those people coming in. So I think from the perspective of when you're talking about a care center, I would say that we've seen a huge shift in how they begin to think about it, and not necessarily about that value, because those conversations can actually expose opportunities to either serve the customer or to provide a cross-sell or upsell opportunity. And I say that in the end only because, yes, there's value to that for the organization, but the conversation and helping the customer understand their needs better, back to our point at the beginning, builds that relationship. And they then, in fact, will go out and more likely to recommend you, more likely to tell their friends. So we have to look at the entire value chain of, it's not just about that conversation, it's the resulting emotion and the resulting behavior.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm almost imagining two different QA scorecards based on that. You know, the one is the what you might call traditional. Did you offer a warm greeting to the customer? Were you polite and respectful? Did you assure the customer that you would help them? Did you confirm that you understood the customer's issue before moving to a resolution? Like, that's kind of, you would say, maybe QA scorecard part one. And the QA scorecard I'm imagining that you're crafting is, did you uncover opportunities to provide more value for the customer? Did you provide value to the customer that they weren't expecting? You know, what do you think that QA scorecard V.2 looks like? And like, how do you operationalize that?
I think it's a combination. I mean, anything else that's gone through a transformation is a little bit of the pendulum swing a little bit, or the teeter-totter, I call it, of we have to let go of some of those things. Like, when's the last time you saw average handle time? I think it's an important measure, but so what? Like, I could have a quick conversation with someone where they were totally ticked off and left and went out and told 20 of their friends. I could have a long conversation, the same thing happens. So, or vice versa. So I don't know what it really tells you, other than to manage. Again, it's from the perspective of the company. It's what the company wants, not really the customer. The customer may want you to stay on the phone longer because they don't feel like they've got their issue resolved, or they're looking for more information. Think about somebody who is implementing a life insurance policy. There's a lot of things they probably want to ask, and you're the right company to go to. And if you're there in the time of need, you better believe they're going to be back. And they'll tell their friends, this company that did it. There's a friend of mine who did that when his father died. He went into 3 banks that each had a part of his dad's account. And one bank immediately tried to sell him, said, oh, you can just consolidate all of your things here. We have this great product. The second one, it took about 10 minutes for somebody to even come and find them in the lobby, even though they told somebody that that's why they were there. And the third was empathetic. I'm so sorry about your loss. Come in, have a seat. Let's just chat about your dad a little bit. I'd love to hear his life story. And then we'll get to the business part. I mean, completely different experiences. Guess who has his money today? The bank that was empathetic, because he felt like they cared for him, and he transferred everything over to that one bank rather than leaving it where it was because of the experience that he had. So when we think about those touch points, we need to see them in the bigger picture.
How do you think customer expectations are changing? Because I'm thinking about empathy there as one of the key factors, and I'm almost torn on it. On one hand, in the CX world, we just are pounding the empathy drum, saying it's so important, and I think it probably is. But on the other hand, I can imagine that the modern customer doesn't care as much, and they just say, "I want the answer, and I want to go." So I wonder, what are you noticing? How do you see customer expectations changing and what they want when they are talking to a customer care center?
I think that is actually part of, I remember, I cannot remember the name because they got acquired by somebody, but when the customer came in, they were using the emotional sentiment score to direct those calls from what would have been the agent that got it to another agent. So the profiling of, this is a person who, maybe it's an older person who is a little bit harder hearing, who doesn't really keep up as much, they're not as savvy, so to speak, on technology. That would require an agent who is more patient and who talks slower, versus myself. When I call into a care center, I'm all about efficiency. I want you to answer my question. I don't want to listen even to your goodbye. Like, I got it solved, thank you. But I don't want to hear, if you have another thing you want to call, like at some points in time I do, but usually I want to get in and get out, get my job done. So those profiles that we create around the types of customers and what they're after and what they need from the organization should vary. We call that a needs-based segmentation. And in some ways, you can get to a really lower level of even knowing when that customer calls in, if they're already a customer, beginning to make that part of their profile. What kind of service do they want? What type of interaction is best for them? What do they prefer? I think that's an important part of where you are.
That makes a lot of sense. I'm almost picturing a matrix where, let's say the sideways part of the matrix is the customer's like static personality. Like, what is their buyer personality? How do they like to be a customer, interact with you as a contact center? And you could have on the way right, mushy feely, lovey dovey, let's talk and do rapport and tell them, asking about my kids, and let's do that. And the way left is like, answer, done. And then I can imagine then the vertical part of the matrix could be something along the lines of, where are they on the same sort of mushy to serious scale, but based on the issue. Because I can imagine that some folks, how you, the sort of service you want depends both on who you are and what you're calling about. So I just made that up on the exactly.
Context. No, it's context. It's, and I think people that, to your point about how do you get there, like you can't automate that. Like, it's a human being. You're trying to put a human being in a box. However, I think there are definitely some ways to get to that understanding in a little bit different way. It could be the first question you ask them, or how's your day going? If they say, oh my gosh, I'm so busy, you're like, okay, this person probably wants to get off the phone. So in the conversation, even, you can begin to kind of tag that and train people to look for where they are. Another way to do that is what I call emotional conversion. So you get somebody on the phone who's very ramped up and very anxious and maybe even angry. the ability for you to understand and empathize with that anger and transition them, convert them to a different emotional state will also change their feeling. If you take them from a negative emotion to a positive, that creates connection to the organization. So I'll give you another example at Cisco Foods. We did a needs-based segmentation. So not all customers are created equal. If you think about restaurant owners, they're all different. And they fell into categories of the bar owner who just needs food to make sure people aren't walking out of his bar drunk. So he has to serve food, versus the chef who owns a restaurant because he loves the presentation and he buys the best quality product, and everything in between. You know, I just want to run my restaurant versus I need a lot of help. And so that needs-based segmentation helped us adapt to the type of person we were sending out as a salesperson, the knowledge they had, the type of service they wanted, whether they were going to place their order online or call it in. All of those things became part of that profile or archetype that we were able to then say, oh, by asking them a few questions, we can get to this archetype, and we know they typically like X, Y, and Z, and give them the right service level, the right person to interact with, and the right channel.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I think is so challenging about any contact center role is the second you pick up the phone, you know nothing. And yes, you know the CRM data or the customer data, but you have 40 or 50 interactions every single day, maybe more. So you're not, taking a minute and visualizing who is this customer, what do they need, and you kind of have to constantly reset all throughout your day. Is there a process that you can apply? You mentioned, a question of how are you doing? Just how are you doing? Could be a good way to get that initial gauge. Are there a couple of other questions or steps that you could apply that would allow you to, on the fly, segment that customer in a handful of useful buckets?
One of them that I love is saying, I'm calling. Thanks for calling in today. I'd really like to hear the story about why you're calling in, because storytelling can be so powerful. It's not just I need to, let's get to the last call I made. I had to call the IRS, and lo and behold, I got right through, and the person was delightful. But it was more about, she didn't ask me, what do you need, or go through the IVR, develop the IVR. I need to reset my PIN to file my taxes, whatever. She said, tell me the story about why you're calling today. And I think that really opens up to me. I'm going to share with you how I got here. Mm-hmm. And by doing that discovery, I think that provides you with a lot more information to understand that context and deal appropriately with, oh, we were trying to do that. By the way, did you know that that's actually online? Versus, can you just reset my PIN? Versus, I tried to do this online. I had one before. I got the letter from you, but can't find it. I need to redo it. Tells her a lot about the fact that maybe I didn't keep it safe, or there was a way to do it online. Just exploring with that person, doing that discovery is a way to get more context and understanding of who they are. Which, as you said, then you can put into the CRM about this person's really tech savvy and whatever is, it wants to, get to the resolution, or wants to help problem solve, or whatever those things are. But I think that's an example of a way to dig in a little bit.
When you asked that question, Diane, I put myself in the perspective of the agent. Tell me the story of why you're calling. And the first emotion I felt was like, oh, great, I'm going to get all this good info. And the second emotion I felt was like, oh, geez, I could totally lose control of this call.
You could. But we just talked about it. The trade-off to that of connecting on that human level. If you think about the cavemen who sat around, all they did was tell stories, right? That was the way that they connected, that they communicated with each other, and they made it real and emotional, because there's nothing like listening to somebody for that place where you have something in common, right? Like I was talking to somebody the other day, and I said, oh, I see you have a picture of a kangaroo hanging back behind you. I said, I was an exchange student to Australia in high school. And she said, oh my God, so was I. And we're literally within 2 years of each other going over. So you look for those connections you can make, because that's the memory that we evoke. and the memory that they're going to attach to the brand. So I think back to your question about how do you give people time to have that human connection that's going to create that value for the organization. And that seems fuzzy. We know that it pays off. We know it pays off. That people will talk about those experiences, they'll remember, and they'll come back again and again, and they'll tell their friends.
When you think about the sort of skills that you need there, to be able to identify those commonalities and the right questions to ask and what kind of person you're talking to, there's almost two components that come to mind. First is the skill of like, can you do it?
Mm-hmm.
And the second is, does your organization have a culture that empowers and enables you to do it?
Right.
So if you're a CX organization and you say, I kind of like the style of conversation that Diane is talking about, and I see, how that flows through and benefits the organization, like referrals and more loyal customers and all that. What is the first step you take? And I imagine it has to be something along the lines of culture and leadership.
Well, I think culture and leadership are always, they're so out there. It's like, yes, everybody says we need to change the culture. It's like, can you tell me exactly what it is you're looking for? Can you define and describe to me what you want people to do differently? And that's exactly when I ask that question, people go, we've never really defined what that is, but we know we want it to change. It's like, well, people don't know where to run toward if you're telling them you want them to do something differently. So describing in the habit, which is the culture of the organization, those kind of unwritten habits that people have and how they interact. In that unwritten habit, you can change that habit by trying out for, let's say for a care center person, spend the morning asking the story question, spend the afternoon just answering the phone like you normally do, and then get the feedback and figure out what was different about that for you. How did the customer react differently? How did it resolve itself? You can track those customers too, right? Did they come back? Did they buy more? Because you know who they are. So I think there's a lot of experimentation that comes into play. But back to your point, I think if you don't identify those things you want to have change and the behaviors that you're looking for, and then train, educate to that, I don't think it goes anywhere. Because people can say all day long, we need to be more customer centric. And you're like, I don't know what that means to me in my role. So being very definitive about the behavior and then trying it out and seeing the difference between A and B. Just try something out and measure it and see how people feel and see how the person who you talk to, like do a survey afterwards or call some of those customers back. And how was your experience versus when you do it in the afternoon with the rote voice, I call it. The person, they pick up the phone and like they have no intonation in their voice. They're just there on the phone. You think you're talking to a bot. And it's a real human being. Doesn't fly anymore.
Not at all.
No.
Diane, I was talking to a contact center leader maybe a month ago or so, and I said, what if you turned your contact center into an experimentation center? Like, wouldn't it be cool? The sales and marketing world, or the marketing world, has been A/B testing since the Sears catalog in the 1800s. But the customer care world and the sales world haven't been testing anything. And I said that, and he said, Mark, I get your point, but you definitely shouldn't call it an experimentation center. The last thing we want to do is experiment with our customer experience. Boy, does that sound risky. And I kind of blushed a little bit and was like, geez, oof, I hope I didn't step on toes there. But what do you think, Diane? Like, how do we bring some form of experimentation to the contact center in a way that continues to deliver a reliable experience that isn't risking the house, but at the same time is allowing the contact center to not be static and be able to adapt and grow and change, just like other parts of the organizations tend to do?
Yeah, I think your point about being an engagement center, I think if you think about care or customer support, that's not really engagement. You can give somebody an answer to their question, but that doesn't mean it's going to drive that deeper emotional connection we talked about. I believe that there are many ways and many individuals within a care center team that would love to experiment and feel valued and have input into those ideas. So one of the things we did with the medical device company is we had the care center team. The first part of what they did was we had them come up with ideas that they wanted to try out. We obviously ran them through a whole, what's this going to impact and what's it look like? But because it's their idea, it holds them accountable and they want success. So they're more all about let's measure and let's figure out how it's going, right? So involving them in that, because I think that's part of the risk of having people do something different. They're like, why am I doing this? It doesn't quite capture as much as it should. The other piece is bringing them also into what I would call the why is the call coming in the first place? So it's probably not more of an engagement there, but it's an engagement for those folks who are really ending up with all the broken experiences to be a part of ideation elsewhere in the organization because they know what's going on. They know where all the pieces are, they know exactly what's broken. So bringing them to those ideas, because then as they think about going back to their organizations, they can shift and say, you know what I discovered talking to the product team? This is more about the content. This is about what's on our website that's confusing. They're going to fix that. So if they're calling in for that in the meantime, how can we explore what's needed and what type of content? Hey, you know, I saw you went to the website before you called. What was missing there? And so they're actually feeding back to the organization that information. So experimentation doesn't have to be where they are. It can be more about testing and exploring with the customer to get ideas from them, kind of co-creation, both internally and with the customer at the same time.
That is fantastic. I think a lot of organizations almost, when they're thinking about where ideas should come from, they skip over the agent level. So they say ideas come from the managers and then ideas come from the customer. But there's not this concept of that you have a contact center workforce. And I always think about, people building the pyramids, somewhere, I think between 20 to 40,000, Egyptians built the pyramids and, people estimate. So 20 to 40,000 people built the pyramids. Think about all of that collective brain power that each person was having their own thoughts and their own little ways they learn to do things. And that is happening right now in the contact center, but no one is asking them what they think. And
it's the first place I go.
Really?
If I'm going to work with an organization, the first place I'll go, in addition to doing like, where's all your information about customers and what are you doing right now, like projects in flight, I'll go sit with the care team and talk to them about what they see and what they're, before I even look at the data. If they can tell me right away, here's the things we know are broken, they just don't have a seat at the table to, that's even the lead doesn't have a seat at the table to go in and, because I think they always feel like they're going to go in and point fingers and go fix your stuff. That's not the case. I think they're discovering things. They just don't have a systematic way to do that. So we create that. We help understand, what if we could reduce, not only can we reduce calls to the care center, that's a byproduct. The real opportunity is you're forcing almost a customer to put extra effort and time into something that they shouldn't have to be dealing with. Right? If you built the product right and you have the right documentation, why should they have to call in 4 times to get it installed? Not good, right? So we're creating these more proactive, design it right in the first place and use that. I always think of it as a reverse pyramid. I think about the customers out there and that first line of defense is really the care team. And that should trickle down to the executives and telling them, here's what's happening in the marketplace. And here's the things our customers are seeing. Not the executive thinks he knows what's happening. He puts it down and tries to make changes. So it flip it on its head a little bit.
It's also so much more fulfilling as an agent when you're given the space to have ideas, share ideas, and have those ideas go someplace that makes the organization better.
Starbucks does that with their, they had a program, My Starbucks Idea. They ran it for about 5 years. They had 270,000 ideas. And one of those was the little stick that goes in the cup that came from a customer. But the happy hour time. There's lots of things that you see at Starbucks does today that came from their employees, and it's an innovation management system. That's all they really implemented. They had the contributors vote things up, and then implemented, I don't know how many, it's 550, I think, out of the 270,000 ideas. It's incredible.
It's incredible. And I think it's Microsoft is known for doing a global competition every year where I think it's every country that Microsoft is in, um, they compete within the country, and it's something like the top 3 teams in each country then propose their idea, and the
Right.
top 10, are directly presented to, I guess not Bill Gates anymore, but Sundar Pichai. And how cool is that? How cool
Yeah.
is that?
Yeah, to bring it in. And you never know, to your point about care teams, we had a guy named Jared who was in one of our design thinking workshops that we did for one client, because we wanted to bring people in from different parts of the organization. So he came in from the care team. And during this design session, we were actually doing prototyping, and he, through the exploration and the ideation and in the prototyping, when he presented his idea, everybody was like all over it. And so we took his idea to the leadership and said, we think everybody really weighed in on this and thought this was of all those things. And they actually ended up implementing this app that he had built in the prototyping. So you don't know where that brilliance lies in your organization if you don't give everybody the chance to contribute and share what they know about the customer and how they can work around issues or design something that's going to better meet their needs.
Now I have a belief that most people are much more capable than they're given credit for, often by others, and that they also give themselves credit for. Um, and I also think that in the contact center space, we're going to see, in order to deliver on the sort of vision that you and I are talking about, a really talented tier of agent needs to be there. And I think people are, when you look at all like the workforce trends, you see agent pay going up, you see competitiveness going up. Now that agents can work remote, you see agents kind of getting more selective in what sort of environments they go to.
Right.
What do you think the agent talent ecosystem is going to look like over the next few years?
We'll be moving. I think it's already happening in all the things that I read, but the mundane tasks, I'm going to say, are going to be taken care of by chatbots and AI and machine learning and some of those others, or people will self-serve. And we've got a digital push going on. It's getting more successful than it has been for many organizations. So those are going to take some of those pieces off. So I think it's really these Uber agents and highly qualified, highly engaging, back to our first conversation, highly engaging associates who can really be a part and represent the brand. Because I don't think people think about the agent being that brand. Think about it. There's times when I think a customer can go through an entire interaction with an organization and never talk to a human being. So when they get to that point where they have a need or they want to talk about something differently, you're going to need somebody who can really engage that customer. It's your one chance to connect as a human. So that's what I think about with the type of people that you hire and the emotionally intelligent people you hire and how they communicate as a human, how they really make a connection. And we see a lot of that happening on the hiring platforms now,
Yeah.
hiring strategies now, that there's just a different approach to the who they want to bring in.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think maybe it was like 2 or 3 years ago, maybe a little more. College education started getting really popular, saying we want, and particularly in Latin American countries. And as we had this nearshore outsourcing, folks would say, oh, our folks have college degrees. And it seems like when I'm looking through job descriptions and what people are touting, that actually over the last couple years hasn't been as much of a criterion. It's been more about the qualities of the individual rather than their particular education status or anything like that.
I think that's going to be true for many professions these days. I don't know that I think I think when I meet people who are super engaged, there's always this continual curiosity, and you can learn a lot through curiosity. It doesn't have to be formally taught. You can be a self learner, focused on the things that you want to learn. Which we can all think back to our college degrees. There's a lot of classes like I don't remember diddly about biology, nothing, nothing. I don't remember anything. Why spend my time doing that when I'm not curious about it and it's not really going to benefit me? Like, why do we require that? I get you want people to have liberal arts, but come on. So I think to your point, not only is that going to shift in what they require, but I think universities are starting to really look at what they're developing and what they're requiring as part of who people are these days and what they're looking for and that focus they want to have.
Yeah, and with the pandemic, how interesting is it that so much self-learning went on with YouTube and masterclass, and everyone's stuck inside their home, and they say, well, I've got nothing to do besides work. I can't go outside. So maybe I go learn something.
It's ironic because I think they said 26% of the restaurant workers didn't go back to their roles, not just because they didn't want to, they're on unemployment, but because they had actually trained up and realized how hard that work was, and they trained up. 26% of the entire restaurant workforce. I don't quote me on that, but that was, I think it's close to that. So
Wow.
that's a true indication that people just got their eyes opened, like that ability to step back and be introspective about what you want and what you enjoy doing. That's really been a big push this year.
Yeah, I'm seeing all these articles on LinkedIn calling it the Great Resignation.
Oh my gosh, that's
Yeah,
wow. That's pretty impactful to think about what you just
yeah.
said.
A
Yeah,
little bit of a hyperbole probably, but still very interesting nonetheless.
I think so too. I think so too.
So then, Diane, if we extrapolate this out to 2030, all of these trends that we're seeing, what do you think the contact center of 2030 looks like?
Wow, that's a tough choice. I don't have a crystal ball. Wait a minute, I do. See this? This is my crystal ball right here.
So
So
look
let's
deeply
look
into
into
it.
it. Deeply into this crystal ball.
Yeah.
I think it will be much more targeted. I think the segments of who serves who in what capacity will change dynamically. That there will be experts, a lot more expertise in certain issues or fields, that it will be more of that engagement piece we talked about, that it is truly about helping them achieve the value out of the product or service, and it is about resolving issues. So I think there's going to be a much more proactive way of doing that. I don't believe that everybody says that the call centers, you're not going to ever be able to get a human being anymore. As a matter of fact, I think the pendulum is swinging the other way, that these Uber agents hiring the right people for the right role for the calls that do come in will dynamically shift the way that they get compensated, to your point, that they get scored, that what quality looks like. I think all of that is going to change. It's not going to be the same fix it approach that we've had for years and years.
Wonderful. Diane, thank you so much. If people want to connect with you or learn more about what you do, how can they find you?
Oh, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn. You just have to spell the name differently. It's Magers. But yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. I'd love to hear more about what you're doing and even innovative ideas. I think, this conversation has been what's going to happen. And I think if people can contribute on your website or on LinkedIn as to some things that they're doing, I think let's carry on the conversation.
Fantastic. Diane, thank you so much for your time today. This was
My pleasure.
totally wonderful.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you.
You too. Talk soon.
Okay.